How good is an i7 from 2008 on a platform that is essentially dead and obsolete? We've already taken a look at the X5675, and today we're going back a little bit further to see if the i7 moniker can survive at least a decade's worth of time. But most importantly, see how well it holds up against games like GTA 5 and Far Cry 5 once paired with a budget graphics card like the R9 390. Let's jump into it. But first, if you're new here to the channel and you want to learn more about building PCs and other gaming related stuff, consider clicking the subscribe button and notification bell to catch all new uploads like this one the moment they drop. Doing this helps me grow here on YouTube and as a content creator, and for that I appreciate you all to the moon and back. What's happening YouTube and the internet? Terrence here, and we're back inside the lab. I made a few changes around here, you might have noticed. Can you hear me now? But as we stated earlier in this video, we are benchmarking and taking a look at the i7-940 with its 4 cores and 8 threads, base frequency of 2.93 GHz, and a max clock speed of 3.2 GHz using Intel's Turbo Boost, which doesn't correlate to a whole lot here, but we are depending and relying on IPC or instructions per clock. And of course there are system vulnerabilities to consider like Spectre and Meltdown, but there have been Windows updates to help mitigate those concerns, although at the expense of performance. And if you're running a newer system, you may not notice, but if you're running an older configuration like the one we have here today, then you'll definitely notice. But Windows does allow you to disable the Spectre and Meltdown protection, which does make your system vulnerable, but eliminates the penalty that comes along with the fix. So while not a huge issue, it is something to consider if you don't want to lose out on any performance while you're gaming. Which, speaking of, the benchmarks will be at 1920 by 1080p, and the games will be tested at both high and low settings to get a general idea of a best case and worst case scenario. So let's get the test bed cleaned up and prepare for the special occasion and fire up and benchmark some games. we are back. The test bed is all cleaned up. I'll admit there was a lot of dust built up between the radiator and the fans, and now we are ready to drop the i7-940 inside of our Intel DSHO motherboard, which has also been detailed and now looks nice and fresh and ready to rock. But first, we have to put everything back together, tidy up the cables a bit, and then of course, play some games. High setting gamers rejoice because when paired with a budget graphics card like the R9 390, the i7-940, our 4-core 8-thread CPU, managed playable frames in games like GTA 5, which saw averages of 85 FPS on average at what I like to call flex settings, which is a combination of high and low settings. And this is a good option if you don't want to sacrifice a lot of performance and you still want to have a little bit of eye candy in your games. But with all of our settings turned down to low, the i7-940 did score significantly higher, hovering around 100 FPS on average at a minimum of 60 FPS at the 1% lows. And then taking a look at Far Cry 5 at both low and high settings, which didn't have much of a difference between the two configurations with this particular setup, but again, the i7-940 did fare much better at the flex options, or the flex settings, managing 80 FPS on average and just above 60 FPS at the minimum and 1% lows. And that's with CSGO as well. It didn't see much of a difference switching between low settings and high settings as well, which averaged over 170 FPS with slightly better minimums and 1% lows when more of the load was put on the graphics card. And then rounding out with Dota 2, which fared well at low settings, but once more even better with our flex settings, averaging 171 FPS at decent minimum and 1% lows of 128 and 68 respectively, making all the games tested here today essentially playable. So how did our Bloomfield i7 do overall? I mean, as a worst case scenario, you could turn all your settings down to low to help balance the load between your CPU and GPU, or you can turn most of the settings down to low or medium with any form of anti-aliasing turned on to push your graphics card even harder. But with modern options like the Ryzen 3 1300X or the Ryzen 5 1600 becoming more and more available, it's getting harder to consider or recommend an older CPU like the i7-940, unless you can find one at a really good price and you can snag an X58 motherboard with some DDR3 memory, but then you'll have a system that'll be able to deliver a playable experience with modern games here in 2020. And if you want to learn more about gaming PCs and other tech-related stuff, jump to either of the two playlists to the left of your screen, or consider clicking the subscribe icon down there at the bottom to catch all new content the moment they drop. And with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and go. Thanks for giving this one a watch. I hope to catch you all in the next one. So until then, be easy.